I still remember the exact second my stomach tightened because that was the moment I realized the forest had gone quiet in a way that felt intentional. My name is Caleb Turner. I was 38 years old that summer, and I had been living out of my old Volkswagen camper for almost 4 years straight. Not the polished, Instagram kind of RV life. This was dust under the fingernails, cracked mirrors, duct tape holding the sink together. I trusted machines more than people, and I trusted roads more than destinations. That mindset had carried me across deserts, through snowstorms, and into places most travelers only ever skim past on a map. The Black Hills weren't supposed to feel like this. I'd rolled into western South Dakota late in the afternoon, July sun still hanging high, lighting up the pines like copper wire. Locals at a gas station outside Hill City had warned me offhandedly, not dramatic, just a casual, almost bored suggestion. If you're heading into the forest, don't stay out after dark, especially not off the main roads. One guy wouldn't even look at me when he said it. Another laughed too hard afterward. Warnings like that had a way of bouncing off me. Every place has its stories. Every forest has its ghosts if you ask the right or wrong people. I told myself this was no different. I nodded, smiled, topped off my tank, and drove anyway. By 7:40 p.m., I was deep enough that the cell signal had vanished completely. The road narrowed, gravel popping under the tires, trees pressing in on both sides like they were listening. I found a small clearing just past a bend. No official campsite, no sign, just flattened earth and old fire rings half swallowed by weeds. That alone should have been my sign to keep going. But I was tired. The engine ticked as it cooled, that familiar metallic clicking echoing into the trees. I stepped out, stretched my legs, and the air hit me, cooler than it should have been for July, sharp with pine sap and something else underneath it. Something damp, old, like wet stone and rusted iron. I brushed it off, told myself forests smell like decay because that's how life works out here. Things die so other things can grow. That thought usually grounded me. That night, it didn't. As the sun dipped lower, the temperature dropped faster than I expected. I pulled on a hoodie, started a small fire, and cooked beans straight from the can. The forest watched me. I don't know how else to explain it. The shadows didn't feel empty. They felt occupied, like seats already taken. By 9:30 p.m., the light was gone completely. No moon, just stars broken up by black branches overhead. That was when the sound started thinning out. First the birds, then the insects. It happened gradually enough that I didn't notice right away, just felt a growing pressure in my ears, like the air itself was bracing. At 10:09 p.m., everything stopped. No wind, no bugs, no distant animal calls, nothing. I stood by the fire holding my spoon, heart beating too loudly in my chest. I remember thinking how unnatural silence is when you've spent this much time outdoors. Nature doesn't go mute unless something else is speaking. I laughed, just once, low and forced, trying to puncture the tension. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. Talking out loud helps sometimes. It anchors you. That was when I heard it, a sound from deeper in the trees, not close but not far either. It wasn't a branch snapping, too deliberate. It sounded like movement, slow, heavy, and then a pause, like whatever made the sound was waiting. I told myself it was an elk or a deer. The Black Hills are full of them. I added more wood to the fire, letting the flames jump higher, casting longer shadows that twisted and bent around the trunks. The smell of smoke mixed with that damp, metallic note again, stronger now. I locked the van doors without fully realizing I was doing it. Another sound followed, this one different. Rhythmic, 3 dull impacts evenly spaced like someone knocking on thick wood with the flat of their hand. Thump, thump, thump. It came from my left, not at the van, not at the fire, somewhere beyond the tree line. I froze, my brain scrambled for logic. Trees fall, rocks shift, but rhythm implies intent, and intent implies awareness. I strained my ears, holding my breath, every nerve screaming. Then it happened again. Thump, thump, thump. Closer this time. The fire crackled too loudly, suddenly intrusive. I felt exposed standing there, light spilling off me into a forest that refused to give anything back. I backed toward the van, never turning my back. Every step measured. That's when I noticed the smell had changed. The air carried something sour now. Animal. Not like a carcass, but like sweat that hadn't cooled yet. A living thing exerting itself nearby. I slammed the van door shut and locked it, heart pounding so hard it made my vision shimmer. Inside, the camper felt smaller than it ever had before. Thin walls, too many windows. I killed the interior light and crouched behind the driver's seat, peering out through a narrow crack in the curtain. The forest edge looked wrong. The shadows weren't where they should have been. Shapes overlapped unnaturally, like depth had folded in on itself. And then movement. Not fast, not dramatic. A darker shape sliding between trees, briefly blocking out stars before dissolving again. I told myself if it was an animal, it would have circled the fire, curious. It wouldn't hide. The knocking came again, this time from the opposite direction. Thump, thump, thump. My mouth went dry. Sweat prickled along my spine despite the cold. I fumbled for my keys, thinking I'd just start the engine, lights on, get out of there. Simple, rational. But my hands stopped inches from the ignition, because above the knocking, barely audible, I heard something else. Breathing. Not my own. Slow. Controlled. Close enough that it fogged the glass just slightly, leaving a faint oval smear on the window beside me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. Whatever was out there knew exactly where I was, and that was the moment I understood the warning hadn't been superstition. It had been mercy. The fog on the window faded slowly, like a breath being deliberately withdrawn, and I stayed frozen long after it was gone, muscles screaming from the strain of holding still. I don't know how long passed like that. Seconds stretched thin, minutes collapsed into nothing. Time stopped behaving the way it normally does when fear takes the wheel. Every sound inside the van felt amplified. The soft creak of cooling metal, the faint hum of my own pulse in my ears, the subtle shift of my weight against the vinyl seat. I was terrified that even the act of swallowing would give me away. Outside, the forest remained silent. No footsteps, no branches moving. Just that same unnatural stillness, heavy and deliberate, as if the night itself was waiting for me to make the next mistake. My mind tried to rationalize. Bear, it offered weakly. Mountain lion. But bears don't knock, and mountain lions don't breathe against glass. I reached, inch by inch, for the flashlight tucked into the side pocket of the door. I didn't turn it on. I just needed to know it was there. Something solid, something that responded when I needed it to. My fingers closed around the rubber grip, slick with sweat. Another sound cut through the quiet, a low murmur. Not loud enough to be words, not distant enough to ignore. It came from behind the van. The tone was wrong, too even, too steady, like someone humming without a melody, testing the sound of their own voice in the dark. The hair on my arm stood straight up. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, eyes squeezed shut, trying to shrink myself smaller than the space I occupied. The murmur drifted closer, circling. I could feel it moving without hearing footsteps, like pressure sliding along the perimeter of the clearing. The smell intensified, hot, coppery, laced with something that reminded me of old pennies and wet leather. I gagged quietly, clamping a hand over my mouth. Then the van rocked. Just once. Gentle. Almost playful. I bit down on my knuckle to keep from making a sound. My heart was slamming so hard I was sure it could be heard outside. I thought about how thin the walls were, how easy it would be to shatter glass, how nothing about this old Volkswagen was designed to keep anything out that truly wanted in. The rocking stopped. For a heartbeat, hope flared. Maybe it was leaving, maybe this was the end of it. That hope died instantly when fingers slid slowly across the side panel. Not claws. Fingers. I could hear the pads dragging lightly over the metal, tracing the shape of the van, learning it. Nails clicked softly against the paint, stopping near the door handle. Testing. A voice spoke then, clear enough that there was no mistaking it. Caleb. My blood turned to ice. I had never told anyone my name out here. No one had followed me. No one knew where I was. The sound of it, my name, coming from the darkness outside that van, shattered something deep inside my chest. The voice wasn't distorted. It didn't snarl or hiss. It sounded familiar, almost gentle, like someone trying not to scare a skittish animal. "Caleb," it said again, closer to the window now. "You shouldn't be alone out here." I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head slowly, silently, as if refusing to acknowledge it would undo what I was hearing. My thoughts spiraled. Hallucinations, stress, lack of sleep, anything to avoid the truth pressing in from every side. The window darkened as something leaned close. I forced myself to look. What I saw wasn't a face, not fully. It was the suggestion of one. Pale skin stretched too tight, eyes reflecting faint starlight without blinking. The mouth moved slightly out of sync with the words, like it was remembering how speech worked as it went. "People get hurt," it said softly. "People disappear." I screamed then. It ripped out of me raw and uncontrollable, bouncing off the trees, tearing through the silence like a flare. At the same moment, I twisted the key and the engine roared to life, headlights blasting white light into the clearing. The thing outside recoiled, not fast, but wrong, like its joints didn't bend the way they should. The light caught its shape for just a fraction of a second, long enough to see that it was too tall, limbs hanging at uneven lengths, skin stretched over angles that didn't belong to any anatomy I knew. I slammed the van into gear and hit the gas. Gravel sprayed, tires fishtailing as I tore down the narrow road, branches slapping the sides, leaves exploding against the windshield. In the rearview mirror, I saw movement, not chasing, not running, but keeping pace effortlessly through the trees, gliding between trunks without sound. The murmuring returned, layered now, overlapping voices whispering things I couldn't understand, rising and falling like a chant carried on the wind. My headlights flickered once, twice, and panic clawed up my throat. "Don't you dare!" I hissed at the engine, gripping the wheel so hard my hands cramped. The road curved sharply, and for a terrifying second, the trees ahead looked identical to the ones behind me, like I was driving in circles without realizing it. The forest pressed in, closing ranks, shadows bleeding together until the path ahead felt less like an exit and more like a funnel. Then, gravel gave way to pavement. I burst out onto the main road, tires screaming, the sudden openness almost overwhelming. The whispers cut off instantly, like a switch flipped. The forest fell back, lights receding in my mirrors until it was just another dark mass under the stars. I didn't slow down for nearly 20 miles. When I finally pulled over, hands shaking uncontrollably, dawn was already bleeding pale gray into the horizon. I sat there for a long time, forehead against the wheel, breathing in gasps that slowly turned into sobs I didn't remember starting. I left the Black Hills that morning and never went back, but the forest didn't stay behind. Even now, years later, I wake up sometimes to silence, so complete it makes my ears ring. I smell metal in places it doesn't belong. I hear knocking, 3 slow beats, on walls that should be solid and safe. And I think about how the locals warned me, not with fear, but with resignation. Some places don't want you there. Some places know your name before you ever arrive, and once they've learned you, they don't forget. I thought getting out meant I was free. That's the lie I clung to for a long time. I drove east until the land flattened and the trees thinned, until the Black Hills were nothing but a memory folded into my rearview mirror. I told myself distance mattered. I told myself whatever I'd encountered belonged to that place, anchored to those pines and that soil. Forest things stay in forests, that's what I wanted to believe. But fear doesn't respect geography. I pulled into a truck stop just outside Rapid City as the sun finally crested the horizon. The parking lot was already alive with movement, semis idling, doors slamming, voices drifting through the cool morning air. Normal sounds. Human sounds. I parked at the far edge, turned off the engine, and just sat there, shaking. When I stepped out of the van, my legs nearly gave out. The smell of diesel hit me, sharp and grounding, and I breathed it in like medicine. A couple walked past me, laughing softly, coffee cups steaming in their hands. They nodded politely, eyes sliding over me without recognition. That anonymity should have been comforting. Instead, it felt wrong. Inside the restroom, harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection. I looked older than I had the night before, lines etched deeper around my eyes, skin sallow, pupils still too wide. When I leaned closer to the mirror, I caught a whiff of it again. Metal. I scrubbed my hands raw, convinced it was stuck to me, soaked into my skin. The smell faded eventually, but the certainty didn't. Something had crossed a line with me. Something had learned me well enough to say my name. I left South Dakota by noon. For weeks afterward, I stuck to crowded campgrounds, paid sites, places with hosts and check-in booths, and kids riding bikes between RVs. I told myself it was temporary, just until my nerves settled. But every time night fell, my body reacted like it was bracing for impact. Silence became unbearable. If the insects stopped chirping, my chest tightened. If the wind dropped suddenly, I was on my feet, scanning shadows. I started sleeping with the engine key in the ignition, flashlight in hand, windows covered no matter how hot it got inside the van. The knocking followed me. Not every night, not even most nights, but often enough that I couldn't dismiss it. Always 3 beats. Sometimes it came from outside, on the van's metal skin, soft but deliberate. Other times it came from places that made no sense at all. Bathroom stall doors, motel walls. Once, a rest area picnic table while I was sitting right there, hands flat on the wood, feeling the vibration travel up my arms. I stopped telling myself it wasn't real. What terrified me more was how easily I adapted. Fear has a way of becoming routine if you let it. You start building your life around it, adjusting your habits, shrinking your world without even noticing. I avoided forests altogether after that, avoided places without cell service, avoided being alone whenever I could manage it, even though solitude had once been the whole point of this life. I told myself I was being smart. The truth was, I was running. It wasn't until late autumn, somewhere in Nebraska, of all places, that I finally understood what the Black Hills had taken from me and what they'd given in return. I'd parked overnight near a river, surrounded by cottonwoods stripped bare by the season. The air was cold enough that my breath fogged inside the van. I lay awake listening to the water move in the dark, a steady sound that should have been calming. At exactly 10:09 p.m., the river went quiet. I sat up slowly, heart hammering, that familiar pressure settling over me like a weight. The smell came back, faint but unmistakable. And then, from somewhere beyond the trees, I heard it. Caleb. I didn't panic this time. That surprised me more than anything. I felt the fear, yes, sharp and immediate, but beneath it was something else, anger. Not wild rage, but a cold, steady fury that rose up and steadied my hands. I realized in that moment how much power I'd been giving this thing by letting it dictate my movements, my choices, my silence. I stepped out of the van. The night air bit into my lungs. The riverbank was empty, moonlight glinting off slow-moving water. I didn't see anything at first, just shadows layered over shadows. "I hear you," I said aloud, voice shaking but strong enough, "but you don't get to follow me anymore." The words felt ridiculous as they left my mouth. I half expected laughter. Or worse. Instead, the silence deepened. The smell lingered, then thinned. The pressure eased, like a held breath finally released. I stood there until my legs trembled, until the night sounds crept back in, water flowing, leaves shifting, some distant animal calling out into the dark. The knocking didn't come that night, or the next, or the one after that. I won't pretend it all vanished. Fear like that leaves scars. I still wake sometimes from dreams where the forest leans in too close, where my name drips out of the dark like a promise and a threat all at once. I still trust my instincts more than I used to, and maybe that's the real lesson buried under all of this. Some places aren't meant to be conquered or explored or proven wrong. Some warnings aren't challenges, they're boundaries. The Black Hills didn't chase me out that night. They showed me exactly how small I was, how thin the line is between confidence and arrogance, between adventure and invitation. I crossed that line because I thought experience made me immune. It didn't. What saved me wasn't speed or luck or even fear in the end. It was listening. to the quiet unease, to the warnings offered without drama, to the part of myself that knew when something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. I still live on the road, I still camp under open skies, but when locals tell me not to stay after dark, I don't smile anymore. I don't nod and ignore it. I thank them. I leave, and I never assume that just because a place looks empty, it actually is, because some forests don't need to chase you, they just need you to stay long enough to learn your name. I didn't notice the fire had gone out until the cold crept all the way up my spine and settled behind my eyes. My name is Evan Mercer. I was 36 that spring, old enough to trust my instincts, young enough to ignore them when they inconvenienced me. I'd driven my 1978 Volkswagen Westphalia, cream-colored, chipped paint, the pop-top that never quite sealed, down into the Ozark National Forest because I needed quiet. Not the city kind of quiet, where engines hum under everything, but the kind that presses in from all sides and forces you to hear yourself breathe. I grew up 2 hours south of there, Arkansas dirt under my fingernails as a kid. I told myself this place was familiar. I told myself I knew these woods. That was the first lie of the trip. By dusk, the campground was mostly empty. Early April scared off the casual campers. Too cold at night, too wet underfoot. Just the way I liked it. I backed the Volkswagen into a pull-off near a creek bend, far enough from the road that headlights wouldn't cut through my windows. The forest closed around me fast, the trees leaning inward like they were sharing something I wasn't meant to hear. The air smelled like damp leaves and iron-rich water, a smell that clung to your clothes, a smell that stayed. I built a small campfire, nothing ambitious, just enough to warm my hands and boil coffee. The flames licked low and steady, orange light catching the bark of nearby trees and making their shadows stretch and shrink like breathing things. Crickets started up, then frogs. A normal chorus, reassuring. I remember thinking how balanced it all felt, like the forest was letting me borrow a corner of it for the night. I should have paid attention to how fast that balance shifted. By 10:45 p.m., the sounds thinned out. Not stopped, just stepped back, like someone lowering a volume knob. The frogs went quiet first, then the crickets lost their rhythm. I told myself it was the temperature dropping. I pulled my jacket tighter and added another log to the fire. That's when the whistling started. It was soft at first, barely more than a thread of sound woven through the trees. 3 notes, repeated. Not a song, not random, controlled, human-shaped. I froze with my hands still outstretched toward the fire. The sound didn't come from one direction. It slid, drifted. One moment behind me, the next somewhere off to my left, then gone long enough for my brain to argue with itself. Probably wind, I thought. Probably some guy messing around. I hated how badly I wanted those explanations to stick. The whistling came again, closer this time. Same 3 notes, same pacing. Too measured to be wind, too clean to be an animal. I stood up slowly, heart tapping against my ribs, and listened harder than I ever had in my life. The forest felt taller standing up, the darkness thicker. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks upward, and for just a second I could see deeper between the trunks. Nothing moved. The sound stopped. That silence, the one that followed, was worse than the noise. It pressed down on my ears until I felt it in my teeth. I realized my hands were shaking. Not panic yet, just adrenaline looking for somewhere to go. I told myself I wasn't afraid. I told myself I was just alert. That's when the fire went out, not slowly, not fading. One moment it was there, the next it was a blackened circle of coals, steam rising like breath from a dead mouth. No gust of wind, no rain, just gone. The cold rushed in immediately, sharp and invasive. The forest swallowed the light like it had been waiting for it to disappear. And then the whistling started again, right behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own boots. My flashlight beam tore through the dark, bouncing off tree trunks, cutting through brush. Nothing. No footsteps, no shape retreating. But the smell had changed. The clean dampness of leaves and water was layered now with something sour, musky, like sweat left too long in fabric. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry, and backed toward the Volkswagen without taking my eyes off the trees. That's when I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, not crunching leaves, placing weight. My heart kicked harder. I raised the flashlight, voice catching in my throat. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound casual. "Camp's taken." The footsteps stopped. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then came a sound I still can't fully explain. Not a voice, not an animal. A breathy imitation of the word I'd just said. "Hey." It wasn't right. The timing was off. The tone flattened, like someone repeating a word they'd never used before. I backed into the Volkswagen, my calf hitting the bumper. The cold metal grounded me, just for a second. I fumbled for the door handle, eyes darting between the flashlight beam and the black spaces it couldn't reach. The whistling started again, right beside the van now, close enough that I felt it vibrate through the air, through my chest. 3 notes. Same pattern. Patient. I yanked the driver's door open and climbed inside, slamming it shut harder than I meant to. The sound echoed unnaturally loud. I locked the doors, hands slick with sweat, and killed the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of the dashboard. The whistling stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just my breathing. The ticking of the cooling engine. Then came the knock. Not pounding, not frantic, just a single firm tap on the side panel, metal on knuckle. I squeezed my eyes shut, every rational thought collapsing under the weight of one undeniable truth. Whatever was outside knew exactly where I was. Another knock. Same spot. Same pressure. I slid down into the seat, pulling my knees up, feeling absurd and small inside the van I'd trusted so completely. I thought about turning the engine on. I thought about the narrow dirt road, the trees crowding in, the way my headlights would slice through the dark just enough to show me how trapped I was. The knock came again. This time, followed by a whisper, so close it might as well have been inside the van. "Evan." I don't remember breathing after that. My name wasn't common. I hadn't introduced myself to anyone. I hadn't said it out loud since leaving the highway hours earlier. My chest tightened, panic blooming fast and hot, threatening to take control. I pressed my palm against my mouth to keep from making a sound. Outside, something shifted its weight. I could hear it now. Subtle movements, circling. The faint scrape of something brushing against the side of the van. The smell grew stronger, seeping through the cracks, thick and animal. Then the whistling started again, directly above me, on the roof. Slow footsteps crossed the pop-top, each step careful, testing. The old Volkswagen creaked in protest, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, catching the faint dash light like falling ash. I curled tighter, mind racing, every instinct screaming at me to run, to scream, to do something. But another voice, quieter, more insidious, told me to stay still, to not be noticed, to become part of the van itself. The footsteps stopped directly over my head. Silence stretched, then came a long, slow inhale. Right above me. The inhale above me dragged on too long, like lungs that didn't know when to stop, and when it finally released, the exhale slid down through the fiberglass roof and settled into my chest as a vibration rather than a sound. I realized then that I was shaking so hard the seat was trembling with me. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, teeth clenched, forcing my breath to slow because panic makes noise. And noise was the last thing I could afford. The smell was everywhere now, wet fur, old sweat, something sour and coppery underneath it all. My mind tried to catalog it, to name it, because naming things makes them smaller. Nothing fit. Another step crossed the roof, heavier this time, right above the driver's seat. The van groaned, suspension complaining softly. Whoever, or whatever, was up there shifted its weight like it was testing how much I could hear. Then came the voice again, not loud, not whispered, measured. "Evan, you left your fire." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might black out. The words weren't threatening. That was the worst part. They carried a flat concern, like a neighbor pointing out something you'd forgotten on the stove. My brain screamed that this thing was close enough to see the extinguished fire, to notice details, to understand routines. I hadn't told anyone my name. I hadn't spoken to anyone. And yet it knew. I reached for the keys with shaking fingers, metal clinking softly, far too loud in my ears. The sound seemed to register outside because the footsteps stopped instantly. The van creaked again as weight shifted, then settled directly over the windshield. I froze. A shadow passed over the glass, broad, distorted by the curve, but undeniably shaped like a head leaning down. I stared at it, unable to look away, my own reflection ghosting back at me, eyes wide and wild. The whistling returned, quieter now, closer to a hum. It vibrated through the windshield, through my skull. The rhythm slowed, stretched, like it was syncing itself to my heartbeat. I turned the key. The engine coughed once. Above me, the humming stopped. I turned the key again, harder this time, silently begging the old engine to wake up. It sputtered, then died. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, then steadied. A hand, too long, fingers bending at the wrong angles, pressed against the windshield. I don't know how I knew it was wrong. Maybe it was the way the joints bulged under the skin, or the way the fingers spread too far apart, stretching the skin tight and pale. Maybe it was the way it paused, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. I screamed then. I couldn't help it. The sound tore out of me, raw and panicked, and immediately I hated myself for it. The hand slid slowly down the glass, leaving behind a streak that caught the dashboard light. Not blood, something thicker, oily. The weight shifted violently, the roof popping and groaning as whatever was up there moved fast now, no longer careful. The whistling erupted again, sharp and erratic, notes colliding, losing their pattern. I cranked the key again and again, sobbing now, voice breaking as the engine finally roared to life. The sound felt obscene in the silence, but I didn't care. The thing on the roof shrieked. There's no other word for it. A high, tearing sound that scraped straight across my nerves, like metal twisted under pressure. The van rocked as weight slammed down hard, once, twice, testing, angry now. I slammed the headlights on. For a split second, the forest leapt into view. Trees, brush, the narrow dirt road curling away into darkness. And there, reflected in the windshield, was a face pressed inches from mine. It wasn't human. It had eyes where eyes should be, but too many reflections glinted back at me, like light bouncing off wet stones. Its mouth was stretched wide in an imitation of a smile, lips pulled too far back, teeth small and crowded and wrong. Then it dropped out of sight. The van lurched as the weight slid off the roof, thudding hard onto the ground behind me. Branches snapped, leaves scattered. Something moved fast through the undergrowth, circling, keeping pace as I threw the van into reverse without looking. The tires spun, throwing mud and gravel. The engine screamed in protest as I fishtailed, nearly clipping a tree, heart hammering so hard I tasted metal. Something slammed into the side panel, once, twice. Each impact sent a hollow boom through the van, metal shuddering under the force. I screamed again, jamming the gear into drive and flooring it. The Volkswagen surged forward, suspension bottoming out as I hit the dirt road, branches clawing at the sides, scraping along the windows like fingernails. In the headlights, shadows leapt and twisted, and for one horrifying second, something ran alongside me on two legs, its movement jerky, too fast, head turned toward me as it whistled. 3 notes, same pattern. Then it veered off into the trees, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. The dirt road felt endless, every curve threatening to throw me into a ravine, every shadow a potential ambush. My hands cramped around the wheel, knuckles white, breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. Finally, mercifully, the trees thinned. Pavement appeared under my tires, the sudden smoothness almost surreal. I didn't stop until I reached the first gas station outside the forest. Lights blazing, the hum of refrigerators and distant highway noise crashing over me like a wave. I parked crookedly by the pumps and sat there shaking, engine still running, too afraid to turn it off. A man stepped out of the station, mid-40s, beard, eyes tired. He looked at me, then at the mud-caked van, the scrape marks along the side, the cracked pop-top. "You all right, buddy?" he asked. I tried to answer. Nothing came out. He followed my gaze to the roof, brow furrowing. "You camping up there?" I nodded, finally managing to swallow. Ozark, I croaked. Back in the forest. His expression changed. Not shock, not disbelief, something closer to resignation. He glanced toward the dark line of trees in the distance, then back at me. You hear anything strange? I thought about the whistling, the voice, my name. I nodded again. He sighed, slow and heavy. Yeah, happens. That word happens hit me harder than anything else that night. He didn't ask for details, didn't seem curious, just told me to park under the lights, offered me water, and said I could stay there as long as I needed. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the 3 notes again, felt the roof creak under weight that didn't belong. By sunrise, the forest looked ordinary again. Green, still, innocent. But I knew better. I left Arkansas that morning and didn't camp alone for a long time after that. Even now, years later, when I sit by a fire and the sounds start to thin, when the night grows just a little too quiet, I listen hard for whistling, and if the fire goes out too fast, I don't wait around to find out why. I thought leaving the Ozarks meant leaving it behind, but fear doesn't respect distance the way maps do. I drove through the morning with the radio off, windows cracked just enough to let the smell of gasoline and old vinyl push the forest out of my lungs. Every time a truck passed me going the opposite direction, my shoulders jumped. Every time the road curved and trees thickened, my grip tightened. I didn't stop until noon, didn't eat until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold a cup. And still, I felt watched. That feeling followed me home. Not the sharp terror from the night before, but something quieter, heavier, like a weight lodged behind my sternum. I cleaned the van in my driveway, hosing mud from the wheel wells, scrubbing the side panel where something had slammed into it. The metal there was dented inward, paint spiderwebbed with hairline cracks. Proof, if I needed it. When I climbed onto a step stool to check the roof, I found marks I hadn't seen in the dark. Long depressions. Not scratches, indentations, like fingers had pressed down hard and stayed there. I didn't tell anyone, not friends, not family. I could already hear the explanations lining up, neat and dismissive. Bear, drunk locals, stress, imagination, and maybe those explanations would have worked if the thing hadn't known my name. That detail poisoned every rational thought that tried to take root. Weeks passed, then months. I went back to work, fell into routine, told myself I was fine. But the nights changed. Silence felt hostile now. If a sound repeated, wind through a vent, a bird calling the same note twice, my heart raced. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams carried the smell with them, the musky sourness creeping into my bedroom no matter how tightly I shut the windows. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the doubt. I started second-guessing my instincts in ways that scared me more than the thing in the forest ever had. Every time my gut whispered something's wrong, another voice answered back, smooth and reasonable. You're overreacting. Remember Arkansas? Remember how your mind ran away with you? That voice almost got me hurt again. It happened the following fall, at a different campground, a different state. Nothing dramatic, just a man lingering too close to my sight, asking too many questions, smiling without warmth. My skin prickled, the same early warning I'd felt in the Ozarks before the whistling ever started, and I ignored it. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself not everything strange was dangerous. By the time I realized my mistake, it took a ranger's unexpected drive-through to send the man walking away, irritation flashing across his face like a mask slipping. I sat there, afterward, hands shaking, understanding crashing down hard and fast. The forest hadn't taught me fear. It had taught me attention. Back in the Ozarks, I'd spent too long rationalizing, too long explaining away the feeling that something wasn't right. I'd treated instinct like an inconvenience instead of a tool honed by millions of years of survival. And whatever had been out there, whatever had learned my name, mimicked my voice, tested the strength of my shelter, it had counted on that hesitation. Predators always do. I still camp. I still drive the Volkswagen, though I replaced the pop top and reinforced the roof. I still build fires. But I don't chase quiet anymore. I don't seek isolation for its own sake. And I listen to the forest, to my body, to the subtle shifts that happen before fear announces itself. Because the truth is, the wilderness doesn't attack without warning. It whispers first. It changes the way sound carries, the way smells thicken, the way your skin tightens for no clear reason. Those moments aren't imagination. They're information. I think about that gas station attendant sometimes. The way he said happens like it was weather, like it was something the forest occasionally decided to do. I wonder how many stories he'd heard. How many people drove out shaken, silent, grateful, just to have escaped with something they could still call themselves. There are places in this country that don't want you there, not in any human sense, not out of malice or intent. They just don't recognize you as anything important. And when you wander into those places alone, unguarded, convinced familiarity equals safety, you become a question the land is free to answer however it chooses. That night in April 2018, the campfire went out when the whistling started. I don't think that was coincidence. Fire is declaration. It says, I am here. And something out there didn't want that declaration made. It wanted darkness, confusion, quiet compliance. It wanted me to listen. And I did, just barely in time. So if you ever find yourself alone in the woods, RV parked under a sky too big to care about you, and the sounds begin to thin, if the fire dies faster than it should, if you hear something that sounds almost human but not quite right, don't argue with yourself. Don't wait for proof. Don't stay to understand. Because some lessons aren't meant to be learned slowly, and some answers cost more than curiosity can afford. I learned that the hard way, under a roof that creaked with the weight of something patient, something curious, something that knew my name. And I've spent every night since making sure nothing else ever learns it the same way again. The desert went silent in a way that felt intentional, like it was holding its breath just for me. My name is Evan Mercer. I was 38 years old that summer, old enough to trust my routines, stubborn enough to ignore the quiet voice in my head when it told me something wasn't right. I'd been RV camping for over a decade, state parks, BLM land, truck stops when I had to, and I believed, truly believed, that if you respected the land and stayed alert, nothing out there could really surprise you. That belief died at exactly 9:41 p.m. when my GPS announced in a calm synthetic voice, "You have arrived at your destination." I hadn't. I was driving a Volkswagen Eurovan, faded white, solar panels humming softly on the roof, tires still warm from a long day of asphalt. The air outside shimmered with leftover heat, the kind that clings to your skin even after the sun disappears. I was somewhere east of Barstow, deep enough into the Mojave that the horizon felt circular, like the desert was closing in from every direction at once. I was alone, by choice. That trip was supposed to be quiet. I'd left Los Angeles with the intention of disappearing for a few days, of putting distance between myself and a year that had hollowed me out more than I cared to admit. I wasn't running from anything dramatic, no crime, no scandal, just a slow accumulation of grief I hadn't processed. A divorce finalized over email, a father buried without a proper goodbye, silence where noise used to live. Camping had always helped me reset. The ritual of it, the planning, the way the road stripped everything down to what mattered. According to the GPS, what mattered was right in front of me. The road ended without ceremony. No sign, no gate. Just a wash of pale dirt opening into a flat basin dotted with scrub and black rock. My headlights cut across the emptiness and landed on nothing. No campsites, no fire rings, no other vehicles, no glow of lanterns or headlamps, just desert, stretching away like an unblinking eye. I checked the screen again, full bars. The name of the place glowed confidently, Juniper Flats Campground. I'd never heard of it, which should have been my first real warning. I prided myself on knowing the lesser-used spots, the semi-legal places that existed in that gray area between official and forgotten. But this one didn't ring a bell. I told myself it was new, or seasonal, or just primitive. That's how denial starts. Not as fear, but as explanation. I stepped out of the van and the heat hit me like a wall. Even at night, the Mojave doesn't cool. It relaxes like a predator stretching after a meal. My boots crunched on gravel that sounded too loud in the silence. No wind, no insects. Even the distant highway noise I'd been hearing for hours had vanished. Silence, out there, isn't empty. It's crowded. I walked a few yards forward, letting my eyes adjust. The stars were brutal, too many, too sharp, like pinholes punched through the sky. The smell of creosote hung faintly in the air, mixed with something else. Something metallic. Old. It caught in the back of my throat. I called out, half expecting to hear another camper answer. Hello? My voice didn't echo. It just died. Back in the van, I pulled up my offline maps. Same result, same name, same pin, right where I was parked. I zoomed out. No nearby roads, no landmarks, just a thin gray line leading nowhere, like the map itself was embarrassed to admit it had brought me here. I told myself I was tired. 12 hours of driving will play tricks on you. Technology glitches. People mislabel places all the time. Still, I didn't shut the door right away. I stood there, 1 foot inside the van, 1 foot out, listening. That's when I heard it. Not loud, not sudden, just rhythmic. A soft tap, then another. Far off, somewhere to the right of my headlights, something was knocking against something else. Slow, deliberate, too evenly spaced to be wind. Tap, tap, tap. I waited for it to stop. It didn't. I closed the van door and locked it, the sound unnaturally sharp. My heart rate ticked up, not into panic, but into that uncomfortable middle space where your body knows something your mind is still arguing with. I turned off the engine. The tapping got clearer. It wasn't closer, just easier to hear now that the motor wasn't running. It had a hollow quality, like wood on wood or metal on bone. Each tap landed with the same interval between them, patient, unhurried, as if whatever was making the sound had all the time in the world. I sat in the driver's seat, hands on my knees, and told myself the truth I wanted to believe. It's probably an old sign, or a loose piece of scrap moving with temperature changes. The desert does strange things at night. I'd told that to other people before. Now I was telling it to myself. I made tea. That was my ritual. When things felt off, I made tea. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, the sound grounding, familiar. Steam fogged the window for a second, then vanished. I forced myself to breathe slower, to stay present. The tapping stopped. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. Because in the silence that followed, I became aware of something else. A smell. Not the clean, dusty scent of desert night. Not creosote. This was heavier, sweet in a rotten way, like old meat left in the sun, faint but unmistakable. It drifted through the vents, through microscopic gaps in the seals, and settled in my chest. I held my breath without realizing it. I'd camped near dead animals before. Roadkill happens, predators leave things behind. But this smell wasn't nearby, it was everywhere, diffuse, as if the ground itself was exhaling it. I checked the time again, 9:41 p.m. I remember that because my phone buzzed then, startling me hard enough that I nearly spilled the tea. No service, but the GPS refreshed, the campground name flickered. For a split second it changed. The text glitched, characters overlapping, then snapped back to Juniper Flats Campground like nothing had happened. My pulse thudded in my ears. I don't believe in omens. I don't believe in haunted places. I believe in people, in animals, in mistakes layered on top of each other until they look like fate. Still, I found myself whispering, okay, to no one. Okay, just sleep. Leave in the morning. That was the compromise I made with my fear. Not bravery, not logic, just delay. I climbed into the back of the van and lay down, fully clothed, shoes on. The mattress felt warmer than it should have, like it had been holding heat for days. I stared up at the ceiling, counting breaths, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then slowly, the tapping started again. Closer this time. Not rushing, not circling, just present. Tap, tap, tap. And underneath it, so faint I almost missed it. Something else layered into the night. A sound that wasn't quite a voice. More like the desert trying to remember how to speak. The sound didn't come from outside the van anymore. It came from everywhere, as if the night itself had learned my breathing pattern and decided to match it. I lay still, eyes open, watching the faint red glow of the dashboard clock bleed into the dark. My ears strained so hard they hurt, like muscles pulled past their limit. The tapping had stopped again, but its absence felt staged, rehearsed. Silence with intention is never empty. It waits. Then the smell intensified. It rolled through the van in slow waves, thick enough that I could taste it on my tongue. Sweet rot. Iron. Something ancient and sun-cured. I pressed my sleeve over my nose and inhaled shallowly, my stomach tightening as an old memory surfaced. Helping my father clear out a shed when I was a kid, finding a dead animal we hadn't known was trapped inside. That same sick realization that something had been decaying nearby for a long time while life went on pretending it wasn't there. I told myself again, dead animal. Desert scavengers. Normal. But my body didn't believe me. The temperature dropped suddenly, not gradually like it should have. One moment the van felt like an oven, the next my skin prickled with cold. Goosebumps rose along my arms. I pulled my jacket tighter and listened to the metal of the van softly contract, ticking as it cooled too fast. That's when I heard footsteps. Not crunching gravel, not shuffling sand. Footsteps that sounded careful, measured. Like someone walking barefoot, placing each step with deliberation. They moved around the van slowly, stopping every few seconds. I could sense the shape of the movement without seeing it, the way you can feel someone standing too close behind you without turning around. I held my breath again. The footsteps stopped near the rear door. I waited for a knock. It didn't come. Instead, something brushed lightly against the side of the van. A dragging sound, soft but unmistakable. Nails? Fabric? Skin? The van rocked, just a fraction, barely enough to register, but enough that my heart slammed hard against my ribs. I sat up, pulse roaring in my ears, my mind scrambling for explanations that wouldn't collapse under their own weight. Coyotes don't do this. Neither do people who want help. I reached for my phone, the screen lighting up my shaking hands. Still no service, no emergency bars. The GPS app was open again without me remembering opening it, the map frozen on my location. But the name at the bottom of the screen had changed. It no longer said Juniper Flats Campground. It said nothing at all. Just blank space where the label should have been. Then the screen flickered, and a new name appeared. One I knew wasn't real because it made my chest tighten in a way words shouldn't. You are off route. I whispered, I know, without thinking. That was when the whisper came back. Clearer now. Not words exactly, more like breath shaped by intent. It slid along the side of the van, thin and intimate, as if whoever or whatever was outside was leaning close, testing the seams, learning the sound of me. I curled my fingers into the mattress, grounding myself, fighting the rising urge to scream. Panic doesn't explode, it creeps, filling you inch by inch until there's nowhere left to stand. A memory hit me then, sharp and unwanted. Something a fellow camper once told me over a fire in Utah, years back. He'd said, if you ever end up somewhere that feels wrong all at once, no build-up, no warning, leave. Don't sleep, don't reason, just go. I'd laughed it off then. Now it felt like a message delivered too late. The footsteps resumed, circling faster this time, not rushed, just curious. I heard breathing now, unmistakably human in rhythm but wrong in texture, like air passing through something damaged. I reached for my keys. The second my fingers closed around them, there was a knock, not on the door, on the roof. 3 slow raps directly above my head. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling. No animal knocks like that. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Another knock followed. Then another. Each one spaced perfectly, patient, expectant. I forced myself into motion, my body finally obeying survival over disbelief. I slid into the driver's seat, hands trembling as I turned the key. The engine coughed once, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It pressed in on me, thick and heavy, like deep water. I turned the key again. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I tried again, pumping the gas, the motion useless but instinctive. The engine sputtered weakly, then died. The van rocked again, harder this time, as if someone had leaned their full weight against it. The smell surged, overwhelming, and I gagged, bile burning my throat. Then the whisper became words. Right outside the driver's side window. Lost. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. I slammed my hand against the horn without thinking. The sound tore through the night, loud and desperate, echoing across the basin. For a split second, the headlights flashed back on, and in that flash, I saw it. Not clearly, not fully. A shape standing just beyond the beam's reach. Too tall, too thin. Its outline wavered like heat distortion, but the posture was unmistakably wrong. Head tilted at an angle no neck should hold, shoulders slumped forward as if gravity pulled harder on it than on the rest of the world. Where its face should have been, there was only shadow. The lights went out again. The horn died beneath my palm. The van went dead silent. I sat there shaking, tears blurring my vision, fear finally breaking through the walls I'd built. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't exhaustion. This place didn't want me here. I fumbled for the emergency brake, released it, and let the van roll backward, praying gravity would do what the engine wouldn't. The tires crunched softly as we moved inch by inch away from the basin. The whisper followed. Closer now, angrier. I felt a sudden violent bang against the rear door, so hard the whole van lurched forward. I screamed then, a raw animal sound I didn't recognize as my own. The slope steepened. The van picked up speed. I steered blindly, heart in my throat, hands slick with sweat, trusting momentum more than reason. The ground beneath us dropped suddenly, the suspension groaning in protest. Then, mercifully, the engine roared back to life. I didn't question it. I slammed the gas and tore down the dirt track, headlights bouncing wildly, the desert blurring past as if trying to erase itself behind me. In the rearview mirror, for just a second, I saw movement. Multiple shapes this time. Standing where the campground should have been, watching me leave. The GPS recalculated with a cheerful chime as if nothing had happened. A new route appeared, leading back toward the highway. I didn't slow down until the pavement screamed beneath my tires and the familiar hum of civilization returned. I pulled over miles later, shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. The smell was gone, the silence broken by passing trucks. The world stitched itself back together around me like nothing had torn it open. But I knew better. Because when I checked the GPS one last time, Juniper Flats Campground was gone. No listing, no history, no trace it had ever existed. And I understood then, the desert doesn't always kill you with claws or teeth. Sometimes it just waits for you to believe the wrong thing long enough to step off the map. I didn't sleep that night. I parked under the harsh white lights of a truck stop outside Needles, the kind of place that never truly rests. Diesel engines idled, doors slammed. Somewhere, a radio played a song too upbeat for the way my hands still shook. I sat in the driver's seat until dawn, afraid that if I lay down, if I closed my eyes, I'd feel the van rock again or hear that voice test the edges of my name. Every few minutes, I checked the locks. Every few minutes, I checked the mirrors. Nothing followed me out of the desert, but that didn't mean it let go. When the sun finally came up, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like exposure. The daylight made everything too normal, too explainable, and that scared me more than the dark had. Because in the light, my mind started doing what it does best, rewriting fear into something manageable. Maybe the engine failure was electrical. Maybe the smell came from a dead animal buried nearby. Maybe the shape I saw was my panic filling in blanks it wanted to fill. Maybe. I drove west instead of north, abandoning the rest of my route without thinking about it. The road stretched long and straight, heat already rising in mirages that made the asphalt look wet. I kept the windows cracked, letting hot winds slap my face, grounding me in sensation. By noon, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. By mid-afternoon, I almost laughed about it. That's how trauma hides. It waits for you to feel safe before it reminds you it's still there. I stopped for gas near Ludlow, hands steadier now, heart rate closer to normal. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the smell of stale coffee felt reassuringly human. The clerk didn't look up when I paid. No one asked where I'd been. Outside, as I walked back to the van, I noticed something on the side panel near the rear door. Scratches, long, shallow lines in the paint, running parallel like something had dragged its fingers or nails along the metal. I stared at them for a long time. They hadn't been there before. I touched one with my thumb. The edge caught my skin, sharp enough to sting. My chest tightened, the memory of that dragging sound flooding back so vividly my knees nearly buckled. That's when the lesson finally broke through the denial. It wasn't about monsters. It wasn't about ghosts. It was about trust. I trusted a screen more than my instincts. Trusted convenience over context. Trusted the idea that every place worth going was already known, mapped, reviewed, pinned with stars and comments. I realized then how dangerous that belief was. The American desert, any wilderness really, doesn't owe us clarity. It doesn't care about our apps or our expectations. There are places that exist outside our systems, places that don't want names because names make things easier to return to. I drove straight home after that. No more camping, no detours, just pavement and radio static and the steady hum of tires carrying me back to something familiar. But familiar didn't feel safe anymore. For weeks afterward, I woke up at 3 a.m. convinced I was hearing knocking. 3 slow taps, always 3. Sometimes it came from my apartment walls, sometimes from inside my own chest. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment when the GPS flickered, when the campground name vanished like it had never been meant for me to read it in the first place. I stopped using GPS for a while, switched to paper maps, asked people for directions, even when it felt awkward. I learned the value of friction, the small human delays that force you to pay attention. Most of all, I learned to listen to the part of myself that speaks quietly. Fear isn't always panic. Sometimes it's a pause, a hesitation, a thought you dismiss because it doesn't come with evidence. The desert taught me that evidence comes later, if you survive long enough to collect it. I still camp. I still love the road, the ritual, the solitude, but I don't chase emptiness the same way anymore. I don't try to disappear because some places notice when you do. Every now and then, late at night, I'll open my phone and scroll through maps out of habit. And sometimes, rarely, fleetingly, I'll see a label appear where it shouldn't. A blank spot briefly named, then gone before I can zoom in. When that happens, I close the app. I don't screenshot it. I don't go looking. Some routes aren't meant to be corrected. Some destinations only exist for people who are already lost. And if there's one thing the Mojave taught me, it's this. When the land goes quiet all at once, when the air feels like it's watching, when your instincts tell you to turn around, don't wait for proof, because not everything that waits in the dark needs to chase you. Sometimes it just waits for you to arrive. The first sound wasn't loud. It was careful, like it didn't want to wake the forest, only us. My name is Evan Cole. I was 36 that winter, and I had honestly believed that if you respected the land, if you kept your distance and followed the rules, the land would return the favor. That belief had carried me through years of RV camping across the country, through desert nights that hummed with wind and mountain passes that iced over without warning. It had carried me into the Allegheny National Forest in December, inside a weather-beaten Volkswagen Westphalia that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old upholstery, with my younger sister Mara asleep on the fold-out bench behind me. We were locals, in a way, Pennsylvania-born, Rust Belt raised, but Allegheny in winter is its own country. Snow had been falling since dusk, not thick, not dramatic, just enough to soften the world and muffle sound. The campground was officially closed for the season, which I knew, which I justified. I told myself we weren't hurting anything. We were quiet. We were careful. We were only staying one night. That's how denial starts. Not with arrogance, but with small permissions. At 3:19 a.m., I was awake because the cold had found a way in. The heater ticked inside, never quite catching up, and the inside of the van felt like a lung struggling to fill. I lay there listening to the quiet pressure of the forest, the way it presses even when nothing moves. Then I heard it. A sob. Not an animal. I'd grown up hearing foxes scream and coyotes laugh like broken toys. This was wrong for that. This was measured, human, the sound of someone trying very hard not to cry out loud. It rose and fell just beyond the thin metal skin of the van, somewhere near the tree line, close enough that it felt intimate. Mara stirred. I held my breath, hoping it would stop before she fully woke. It didn't. Evan? Her voice was thick with sleep. Do you hear that? I did what older brothers do when fear knocks first on their own chest. I minimized it. Probably a fox, I whispered. They sound weird at night. The sobbing paused as if listening. Then it changed. Hello, a voice said, soft and trembling. Is someone there? The word hello slid under my skin. It was wrong the way it landed, too precise, too clean. My heart began to beat with a deliberate slowness that felt rehearsed, like it was buying time. Mara sat up, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. That's a person. I know, I said, and hated myself for how quickly the lie followed. Probably someone lost. We should stay put. Another sob, closer now. I smelled something sharp and metallic beneath the stale warmth of the van, cold air sneaking in, carrying the forest with it. Sap, wet leaves, and something else I couldn't place. Please, the voice said. I'm freezing. There it was, the hook. The thing that snagged not my fear, but my guilt. December nights out there could kill you quietly. I pictured a woman without a coat, hands numb, lungs burning. I pictured headlines. I pictured the look Mara would give me if I did nothing. The forest pressed in, the silence between the sobs stretching just long enough to feel deliberate. I'm going to look, Mara said, already reaching for the zipper of her sleeping bag. No, I said, sharper than I meant to. She froze, eyes on me. I softened my voice. We don't know who that is. The voice outside shifted position. I could hear the crunch of snow now, measured steps circling, not approaching directly. The sound moved from the driver's side to the rear, slow, patient. I can hear you in there, it said. Not accusing. Almost relieved. I don't want to scare you. My skin prickled. The heater ticked louder, a nervous metronome. The windows were fogged, opaque, but I imagined a shape just beyond them, breath blooming in the cold. Call out to them, Mara whispered. Ask if they need help. I didn't answer right away. Something old and quiet inside me was tallying details. The closed campground. The hour. The way the voice never cracked when it spoke, only when it cried. The way the steps circled instead of approaching the door. I have a phone, the voice added as if reading our thoughts. But there's no signal. Can you just open up? I won't come close. The smell again, stronger now. Iron and damp wool, my mouth tasted like pennies. We can call park rangers in the morning, I said, raising my voice enough to be heard. We can't open the door. Silence. Then, from somewhere behind the van, a different sound, lighter, higher. A child's sound, a whimper. Mara gasped. Her hand found my arm, fingers digging in. Evan, that's a kid. The whimper hiccuped into a cry, thin and reedy, the sound of lungs not fully filled yet. It scraped against something deep and reflexive in me, something that didn't care about logic or odds. Please, the first voice said again, closer than before. He's so cold. My mind split in two directions. One half ran through reasons. No footprints leading in, no engine sounds, no flashlight beam cutting the dark. The other half built pictures it couldn't unsee. A small body wrapped in too thin fabric, frostbitten fingers. Blame that would never wash off. I moved to the front seats, peering through the windshield. Snow reflected the moonlight in a dull sheen, flattening the world. Beyond the headlights' weak spill, the trees stood like witnesses who had decided not to testify. I don't see anyone, I said. You don't need to, the voice replied, immediate, intimate. Just open the door. That was when the whimper stopped abruptly, like a switch flipped. The quiet that followed was worse than the sound. It felt staged, a held breath. I realized then that the crying had never echoed. The forest hadn't answered it. No owl, no distant call. It existed alone, contained, as if it belonged to something that didn't quite belong out there. Mara was shaking. We can't just leave them. We're not leaving, I said. We're staying. A pause. Then footsteps again, faster now, crunching straight toward the sliding door on Mara's side. The handle rattled once, not pulled, tested. Mara screamed. "Hey!" I shouted. "Back away from the vehicle!" The footsteps stopped. Right there, inches away, I could feel the presence through the door, a pressure like a held palm. I said I wouldn't come close, the voice murmured, suddenly calm. No tremor now, no cold. You don't trust me. No, I said, my own voice shaking despite myself. I don't. Another sound joined the quiet, then faint but unmistakable, the soft tap of fingernails against metals, slow and thoughtful, tracing the outline of the door. Tap, tap, tap. The smell surged, overwhelming now. Blood, there was no mistaking it. Mara buried her face against my shoulder. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened at all. Then the crying started again, right outside the windshield this time. Impossibly close. The sound of a child calling for someone who would never answer. I reached for the keys, hands numb, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might give us away. And just as I turned the ignition, the voice whispered, right beside my ear through the thin glass, "Don't leave us." The engine coughed once, a dry mechanical gasp, and in that half-second of failure, the forest leaned closer. The crying didn't stop when I turned the key. It shifted. It slid sideways across the windshield, like something moving its mouth along the glass, searching for the place where the sound would hurt the most. I felt it vibrate through the steering wheel, not loud, just intimate, like it was meant for my bones. "Evan," Mara whispered. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. I turned the key again. The Volkswagen protested, the starter grinding like it was offended to be woken in this cold. My foot hovered over the gas, useless until the engine decided to forgive me. Outside, the crying broke into short, sharp gasps, the kind a child makes when they've cried too hard and their body can't remember how to breathe normally. The headlights flickered on. For a fraction of a second, I saw movement at the edge of the beam, something low to the ground, then upright, then gone. No clear shape, just disruption. Snow collapsing where it shouldn't. The engine caught. The sound was too loud. It felt obscene, like shouting in a church. The crying stopped immediately, cut off so cleanly it made my stomach lurch. Silence rushed in to fill the space, heavy and expectant. "Drive," Mara said. Her voice was steady now, too steady, shock settling in like a sedative. "Just drive." I shifted into gear, hands clumsy, and eased forward. The tires spun uselessly for a heartbeat on the packed snow before finding purchase. As we rolled ahead, the beam of the headlights swept across the clearing, over picnic tables half buried in white, over the dark mouth of the vault toilet, over the sign announcing the campground's name in cheerful green lettering that felt mocking now. Then the lights caught something else. Footprints. They circled the van in a loose, deliberate ring. Adult-sized boots. Deep impressions, confident, and smaller prints alongside them, too small, too close together, wrong in their proportions, like someone guessing at what a child's steps should look like. They didn't lead away, they just ended. Mara made a sound deep in her throat, something between a sob and a laugh. They were here the whole time. I didn't answer. I couldn't stop staring at where the prints vanished, as if the ground itself had decided to forget them. As we passed the edge of the clearing, the road narrowed, trees closing in, branches heavy with snow arching overhead. The forest swallowed us quickly, headlights carving a tunnel through blackness. I drove faster than I should have, every shadow threatening to step into the beam. Then the knocking started. Not on the door this time, on the back of the van. 3 slow thuds, spaced evenly like someone knocking on a coffin lid. Mara screamed again, full-throated now. I swore and accelerated, the engine whining in protest. The knocking followed us, not matching the rhythm of bumps or potholes, but keeping its own pace. Thud, thud, thud. "Make it stop," Mara cried. "Please make it stop." "I'm trying," I said, though I had no idea what that meant anymore. My world had shrunk to the narrow cone of light ahead and the sound behind us that refused to fade. The road curved sharply, and as I turned, the headlights briefly illuminated the side mirror. There was nothing there. No hand gripping the ladder. No figure running behind us. just swirling snow kicked up by our passage, dancing like static. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The silence afterward rang in my ears. My hands were slick with sweat despite the cold, fingers aching where I'd clenched the wheel too hard. My breath came shallow, each inhale scraping. We drove for what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than minutes before the trees thinned and the road straightened. A faded reflective sign flashed by, state route, and then pavement, blessedly bare of snow. Only then did I slow down. Mara was crying quietly now, tears tracking down her cheeks, eyes unfocused. I pulled over at the first wide shoulder I could find and put the van in park. The engine ticked as it cooled, a familiar sound that usually meant safety. Tonight, it just meant we'd stopped. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I wanted to open the door, Mara said finally. Her voice cracked on the last word. I really did. I know, I said. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming even though I hadn't. I almost did too. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket. Do you think it was a person? I thought of the footprints that didn't leave, the way the voice had lost its tremor the moment fear stopped working, the smell of blood where there shouldn't have been any. I think it wanted us to think that, I said carefully. Mara nodded like that answer fit somewhere painful but survivable. We didn't go back to sleep. Dawn found us parked at a gas station miles away, fluorescent lights buzzing, the world suddenly full of normal sounds, truck engines, a radio playing inside the convenience store, the clink of a coffee cup on a counter. In the harsh morning light, the van looked the same as it always had. No scratches, no handprints, no sign that anything had touched it at all. Except for one thing. On the rear door, just below the window, there were 3 faint smudges in the dust and road salt. Long, narrow marks, parallel to each other, too evenly spaced to be accidental. We didn't talk about Allegheny much after that, not really. But it changed the way I camp, changed the way I listen. I learned that night that danger doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it cries. Sometimes it wears the shape of the thing you'd run into the dark to save. And the forest, any forest, doesn't care about your morals. It doesn't reward good intentions. It just provides space for whatever wants to step forward when you're tired, cold, and trying to believe the world is kinder than it really is. I still camp. I still love it. But I never, ever open the door at night for a voice I can't see. Because some sounds aren't asking for help. They're asking for permission. I didn't understand how deeply that night had followed me until weeks later, when I woke up in my own bed and still reached for the van keys before I reached for the light. Sleep changed after Allegheny. It became thin, brittle. Sounds slipped through it too easily. A neighbor's dog crying at dusk made my pulse jump. A child's voice, drifting from a playground carried too far in the evening air, would hollow me out in a way I couldn't explain without sounding unhinged. Mara noticed it before I did. She always did. You don't listen the same anymore, she said one afternoon while we were unpacking gear in my garage. The Volkswagen sat there between us, washed and ordinary, its faded paint dull under fluorescent lights. You're not relaxed, you're scanning. She was right. My body had learned something my mind hadn't finished processing yet. That night in the forest had rewired the way I trusted silence. I'd grown up believing quiet meant safe. Now I knew it could mean waiting. We tried to rationalize what happened. That was the phase that came next. We told ourselves it could have been people, meth heads, hunters squatting illegally, someone playing a cruel prank. But every explanation fell apart when we pressed on it too hard. Why the footprints that ended? Why the child's cry that shut off like a switch? Why the smell? And why did neither of us ever remember hearing footsteps leave? The real weight of it settled one evening in late January when I finally sat down and looked up reports from that area. I didn't want folklore. I didn't want paranormal forums. I wanted boring truth. Search and rescue logs, missing persons, anything official. There were 3 cases over the last decade within a 30-mile radius. Winter disappearances, campers, hikers, One couple in a van who'd parked illegally during the off-season. Their vehicle was found abandoned, doors open, keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle. No bodies recovered. The detail that made my stomach drop was buried in a short interview with a volunteer searcher. He said they'd followed crying sounds deep into the woods more than once. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark garage, the smell of oil and old rubber thick in the air. The Volkswagen's windows reflected my face back at me, older than I remembered, eyes carrying a question I didn't know how to answer. Why us? That question haunted me more than what it was. I think the answer is simpler than I want it to be. We were tired. We were cold. We believed we were alone. And I believed, deeply, in being the kind of person who helps. That belief almost killed us. I don't say that to harden people. I say it because there's a difference between compassion and surrender, between empathy and instinct. Out there, in places where help is hours away and the rules of society thin out, your instincts are older than your morals. They exist because something once hunted us in the dark and didn't always look like a monster while it was doing it. A few months later, spring tried to make things feel normal again. I took the van out alone for a short trip, nothing remote, nothing wild, a maintained campground, other people nearby, children laughing in daylight. I told myself it was exposure therapy, reclaim the thing you love. That night, as the sun set and the air cooled, a sound carried across the campground, a woman calling for someone. Just a name, repeated. Ordinary. Human. My body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened. My skin prickled. I didn't move. Other campers responded instead, voices calling back, footsteps crunching. A moment later, laughter. A reunion. Nothing sinister at all. I sat there in my driver's seat long after dark, shaken not by fear, but by how close I'd come to standing up automatically, to answering without thinking. That's when I understood the real lesson Allegheny had pressed into me. Fear isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the last honest thing you have. The wilderness doesn't test your courage the way movies make it seem. It tests your judgment. It tests your ability to live with the possibility that not every cry is meant for you, and not every role you want to play is one you survive. Mara doesn't camp anymore. She's not ashamed of that. She told me once that the forest took something from her she didn't want to negotiate for back. I respected that. I envied it even. I still go, but I go differently. I don't camp where I'm not supposed to. I don't convince myself rules or suggestions. I keep my doors locked. I keep my keys in the same place every night. I trust my gut even when it makes me feel cruel. And if I hear something crying in the dark, real or not, I stay inside, engine ready, eyes forward. Because I know now how thin the line is between being a good person and being a missing one. Somewhere in Allegheny National Forest, there's a place where the snow remembers footsteps that don't belong to anyone who walked away. I don't know what stands there when the light fades. I don't know if it's human, animal, or something that learned us too well. But I know this. It didn't want to break the door down. It wanted us to open it ourselves. I learned that night that silence can feel heavier than noise, especially when it settles into your chest and refuses to leave. My name is Caleb Monroe. I was 34 then, and I was driving west alone in my old Volkswagen Vanagon, the kind that hums like it's thinking out loud even when the road is empty. I'd rebuilt parts of it myself, hands scraped, knuckles bruised, the smell of oil baked into my skin, because I trusted what I could touch more than what I couldn't see. That trust had carried me across deserts before, across long, honest miles where the only danger felt predictable. Heat, distance, my own fatigue. Route 50 was supposed to be one of those miles. The loneliest road in America, they called it, like a joke you only understand after it's already laughing at you. October had cooled the desert just enough to make the air feel sharp. The sun was dropping behind the mountains in a way that flattened the world, turning sagebrush into black cutouts and stretching shadows across the asphalt like fingers. I remember checking the clock, 7:55 p.m., and thinking I'd push another hour before pulling off to sleep. The Vanagon's heater clicked on and off, unsure of itself, and the dashboard lights glowed soft amber, like a campfire you don't want to disturb. I hadn't seen another vehicle in almost 40 minutes when I noticed it ahead. Another RV, parked crooked on the shoulder, hazard lights off, no reflective triangles, no sign of life. Just sitting there like it had wandered off the road and decided to stay. My first instinct was annoyance. Out here, you don't leave a vehicle like that unless something's wrong, and something wrong tends to spread. I slowed anyway. I always did. It's a habit born from other trips, other nights, when stopping once had saved me from sleeping through a flash flood. Denial is easy when the road feels infinite. As I rolled closer, the details sharpened. It was a newer Class C, white with a thin blue stripe, windows dark, no movement inside, no figures, no glow of a television. I passed it by maybe 20 yards before the smell hit me. Hot metal, coolant, that unmistakable warm engine scent that doesn't belong to something abandoned. I felt it before I fully understood it, a tightening just under my ribs, like my body knew something my mind hadn't accepted yet. I pulled over ahead of it, gravel crunching under my tires, and killed the engine. The desert went quiet in that way that isn't really quiet at all, wind moving through dry grass. The faint ticking of my own engine cooling, each click a second I could count. I sat there longer than I should have, hands on the steering wheel, telling myself stories that felt reasonable. Maybe the driver walked back down the road for help. Maybe they were changing a tire just out of sight. Maybe the heat was lingering. Rationalization is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. When I stepped out, the cold surprised me. October nights in Nevada don't ease into darkness. They drop you into it. I pulled my jacket tight and walked back toward the other RV, my boots loud on the gravel. Up close, the warmth was undeniable. I hovered my hand near the hood and felt it radiating like a living thing trying to hide its pulse. The side door was closed, no lights inside. I knocked once, then again the sound flat and swallowed by the open space. Hello? My voice sounded smaller than I expected. Nothing answered. No footsteps, no shifting weight, no human noise at all. I tried the door. It wasn't locked. That was the second thing that didn't sit right. People lock their doors out here, even when they're just stepping away, especially when they're just stepping away. The door swung open with a soft sigh, and the smell changed. It wasn't rot or blood or anything cinematic. It was worse than that because it was familiar. Coffee gone cold, damp fabric, the faint chemical tang of antifreeze, and underneath it all, the stale sweetness of breath. The interior was tidy in a way that suggested intention. A folded map on the dinette, 2 mugs in the sink, rinsed but not dried, shoes lined up by the door, no sign of struggle, no sign of haste. I stood there too long cataloging what wasn't wrong because it kept me from asking what was. The engine was still warm. I called out again, louder this time, letting my voice fill the space. It came back to me unchanged. I stepped inside just enough to feel the floor under my boots, the RV rocking slightly with my weight. The temperature was wrong. Not cold like the night, not warm like the engine, held in between, as if the space itself hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. I told myself I'd leave a note. That was the plan I clung to. A simple message. Saw your RV, engine still warm. I'm camped up the road. Call if you need help. It sounded responsible. It sounded safe. I found a pen and a scrap of paper from my own van, wrote with hands that were steadier than I felt, and placed it on the dinette where it couldn't be missed. As I turned to leave, I noticed the key. It was in the ignition. That detail slid into me slowly, like cold water seeping through a crack. You don't leave keys in the ignition unless you're coming right back. You don't leave them if you're scared. You don't leave them if you're gone for long. I imagined footsteps in the dark, someone just beyond the reach of my headlamp, watching me catalog their life. The thought wasn't dramatic, it was practical. Out here, you think in terms of proximity and intent. I backed out, closed the door gently, and walked away without running. Running feels like an admission. I didn't want to give the desert that satisfaction. Back in my Vanagon, I locked the doors and sat in the dark, not turning the engine over right away. I listened. At first, it was nothing but wind. Then, faintly, something else. A low sound, almost rhythmic, like a distant generator cycling. I couldn't place it. It wasn't coming from my van. It wasn't coming from the road. It felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere, a vibration you feel more than hear. I told myself it was the other RV settling, metal cooling. That ticking sound again, only magnified by the open space. The desert has a way of amplifying your explanations until they feel true. I drove on. I didn't camp far. Just a pull-off tucked behind a rise of rock, far enough that the road disappeared, close enough that I could see headlights if anyone passed. I parked nose out, habit drilled into me by years of restless nights, and shut everything down. No lights, no music. Just me in the dark and the sound of my own breathing, which I tried to slow because it felt too loud. Sleep didn't come. It rarely does when your mind keeps returning to the same unresolved equation. Engine warm. No one inside. Keys in the ignition. I replayed it until the details lost their edges and became shapes I couldn't quite hold. At some point, the cold crept through the van, and I pulled my blanket tighter, pressing my feet against the wall for warmth. That's when I heard the door. Not my door. The other one. A metallic thunk carried on the wind, distant but distinct, followed by the unmistakable sound of an engine turning over. I sat up, heart hammering, every sense sharpening at once. Headlights flared briefly over the rise, then cut out. The generator-like sound returned, closer now, pulsing through the ground. I stayed still, fighting the urge to start my own engine, to announce myself. Outside, footsteps moved in the gravel, slow and deliberate, circling. The sound stopped near the front of my van, close enough that I could hear fabric shift, breath catch. I held mine, counting seconds like I'd counted the ticks of cooling metal earlier, realizing too late that some silences aren't empty. They're occupied. I didn't move because the moment I did, the night would know exactly where I was. The footsteps lingered near the front of my Vanagon, close enough that I could hear gravel compress under weight, then release. Whoever it was wasn't pacing. They were standing still, shifting just enough to remind me they hadn't gone anywhere. The sound of breathing carried through the thin metal shell of my van, slow, controlled, not labored, not panicked. That was what terrified me most. Panic makes mistakes. Calm waits. I kept my eyes open, fixed on the faint outline of the windshield, the stars barely visible through the glass. My keys were in my pocket, my phone face down on the seat beside me, its screen dark. I thought about reaching for it, then didn't. Light would give me away faster than sound. I'd learned that lesson years ago, in a different place, a different fear, one I'd sworn I wouldn't let sneak up on me again, and yet here it was, wearing a new shape. The footsteps moved again, this time toward the side of the van. My breath caught when I heard fingers brush along the metal, a soft dragging sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't searching, it was familiarizing, like someone learning the edges of something they planned to use. I told myself it could be the owner of the other RV, someone who'd finally returned, seen my van, and was deciding whether to ask for help. That story held for about half a second until the hand stopped just behind my door. I felt the pressure change, the slightest pull on the handle that didn't commit to opening it. Testing. Measuring resistance. The lock held. I didn't relax. Outside, the generator-like hum faded, replaced by the soft idle of an engine running somewhere beyond the rocks. Close. Too close to be coincidence. My mind kept trying to draw a map of the situation, but every version ended with me exposed, a thin-skinned vehicle between myself and whatever had decided this pull-off was worth their time. The hand left the door. Footsteps retreated a few paces, then stopped again. Minutes stretched. My legs cramped from holding still. My jaw ached from clenching it. I focused on details that anchored me. The smell of old upholstery, the faint rattle of vent above my head, the steady thud of my heart that felt like it might give me away on its own. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, just two firm taps, spaced evenly, right where my head rested against the wall. Not a plea, not a mistake, a signal. "Hey," a voice said quietly, close enough that I could feel the vibration of it through the van. Male, calm. "You all right in there?" I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice not to shake, and I couldn't trust the situation to be what it pretended to be. Out here, politeness is a tool. So is silence. Another pause, then a sigh, exaggerated like disappointment. The footsteps moved again, this time toward the back. I heard something scrape lightly against the bumper, then the unmistakable sound of my rear hatch handle being lifted. Tested. It didn't open. I'd locked everything. Habit again. Muscle memory saving me when my mind was still catching up. The footsteps moved away, circling once more, slower now. I wondered if they were counting windows, measuring angles, deciding effort versus reward. The thought made my stomach turn. I wasn't a person in that calculation. I was an object, an obstacle. When the engine started again, it was sudden, loud in the quiet. Headlights swept across the rocks, briefly illuminating the inside of my van in harsh white before swinging away. I stayed frozen, waiting for the sound to fade completely before allowing myself to breathe again. The RV drove off, tires crunching, my engine receding until it became just another layer of the desert's noise. I waited longer than felt reasonable. 10 minutes, maybe 20. Time lost its shape. When I finally started my own engine, the sound felt obscene, like shouting in a church. I didn't turn on the headlights right away. I just let it idle, listening, making sure the night didn't answer back. When I drove, it was slow and deliberate, eyes scanning every inch of the road ahead and behind. I didn't see the other RV again. No taillights, no silhouettes. Just empty asphalt stretching into darkness. The stars overhead indifferent to the fact that something had brushed past my life and kept going. I didn't stop until Ely. By the time I pulled into a truck stop on the edge of town, dawn was threatening the horizon with a thin line of gray. The place was quiet, a few semis idling, their drivers asleep inside, the smell of diesel and coffee mixing in the cold air. I parked under a light, locked the doors, and finally let my body do what it had been holding back. My hands shook so badly I had to sit on them to keep them still. Inside the truck stop, the cashier didn't ask questions. She just poured the coffee and slid it across the counter like she understood that sometimes words only make things worse. I sat in a booth by the window, watching the sky lighten, replaying the night in fragments that refused to line up neatly. The warm engine, the empty RV, the calm voice at my door. I thought about the note I'd left, about the keys still in the ignition, about how close I'd come to assuming good intentions because it felt easier than trusting my instincts. That realization settled heavier than the fear itself. I'd wanted to believe the road was still the simple thing I remembered, that danger announced itself clearly, wore the right signs. But it doesn't. Sometimes it waits quietly, tests your locks, and moves on when you don't open the door. When the sun finally broke free of the mountains, I went back out to my van and sat behind the wheel without starting it. The light revealed nothing new, no damage, no marks, no proof that any of it had happened at all. That's the hardest part of nights like that. They leave you with only yourself as evidence. I didn't quit camping after that. I didn't sell the Vanagon or swear off empty roads. But something shifted. I stopped romanticizing solitude. I stopped pushing just one more hour when my body told me to stop. And I stopped explaining away the quiet warnings that rise up before fear has a name. Route 50 still stretches across Nevada, unchanged. A ribbon of promise and threat depending on how you travel it. I drive it differently now. I listen harder. I trust the weight in my chest when something feels off. Because I learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do out there is convince yourself that warmth means safety, that silence means emptiness, and that a knock in the night deserves an answer. The road out of Ely felt narrower than it had any right to be, even in daylight. I stayed under the speed limit, hands steady on the wheel, eyes flicking to the mirrors more often than necessary. Nothing followed me. No white RV. no familiar shape lingering too long in the distance. And yet the sense of being watched didn't dissolve with the sunrise. It clung to me, quiet and patient, like dust that settles into seams no matter how often you shake it out. By mid-morning, the desert had shifted again. Light flattened everything, stripping away the drama of shadows, making the night feel almost imaginary. That's how it tricks you, how it convinces you that fear was just exhaustion, that your mind filled in gaps that never existed. I caught myself doing it too, replaying the events with a colder logic. Maybe the man really had just wanted help. Maybe the other RV belonged to a couple arguing somewhere off-road. Maybe I'd read too much into the warmth of an engine, the calm in a stranger's voice. But every time I started down that path, my body answered for me. A tightening in my throat, a pressure behind my eyes. The same instinct that had kept me silent in the van refused to be reasoned away in daylight. Instinct doesn't care about narratives, it only cares about patterns. I pulled off later that afternoon at a rest area overlooking a wide basin, the kind of place that invites reflection, whether you want it or not. I sat on a concrete barrier with a sandwich I barely tasted, watching heat shimmer above the road. Somewhere out there, that other RV existed, or didn't. The uncertainty gnawed at me. Not knowing is its own kind of haunting. What stayed with me most wasn't the fear of being hurt. It was the realization of how close I'd come to inviting something into my life simply because it wore the right shape. An RV. A voice asking if I was all right. Familiar things we associate with safety and community on the road. I'd built my camping identity around those assumptions that RVers look out for each other, that shared vulnerability creates trust. Most of the time, that's true. But the exceptions are what matter, because they only need one opening. I thought about the countless nights I'd slept with doors unlocked, windows cracked, trusting the vastness to protect me. About the times I'd ignored my gut because I didn't want to seem paranoid, because fear felt like an insult to the freedom I chased out there. That night on Route 50 didn't take that freedom away. It reframed it. Freedom without awareness is just exposure. As evening approached again, I faced a choice. Keep driving until exhaustion forced me to stop, or camp deliberately on my terms. I chose the latter. I pulled into a small, official campground just before dusk. Nothing scenic, nothing romantic. Gravel pads spaced evenly, a few other rigs scattered like islands. I backed in carefully, nose out, same habit, but this time with intention rather than reflex. When darkness settled, it felt different. Not empty, not pressing, just night. I cooked a simple meal, ate slowly, listening to the ordinary sounds of other campers, doors closing, laughter drifting, a radio playing somewhere down the row. Community isn't about numbers, it's about shared presence. That mattered more to me than isolation ever had. Later, lying in my van, I noticed how my senses kept scanning, cataloging. The difference now was that I wasn't fighting it. Vigilance doesn't have to be panic. It can be respect for the environment, for yourself, for the thin line between curiosity and danger. Sleep came in fragments, but it came. In the weeks that followed, the story settled into me, changing shape as all true experiences do. I told it to no one at first, worried it would sound dramatic, unprovable. Eventually, I shared pieces of it with another traveler over a fire in Utah, then another in Arizona. Each time the reaction was the same, not disbelief, but recognition. Stories of engines warm when they shouldn't be, of knocks that didn't feel right, of chances taken and narrowly avoided. That's when I understood the real lesson of that night. Not that the road is dangerous, not that strangers are threats, but that listening to yourself, to the environment, to the subtle cues that don't shout, is not fear. It's wisdom earned the slow way. I still drive Route 50 sometimes. I still love the way it stretches your sense of scale, how it forces you inward when there's nothing else to hold on to. But every time the sun dips low and the shadows lengthen, I remember standing in that other RV, hand hovering over a still warm hood, feeling something unnamed slide into place. The desert didn't chase me that night. It didn't need to. It just showed me how thin the margin is between safety and story, between passing through and becoming part of the landscape in a way no one ever plans. And now, when I park for the night and turn off the engine, I sit for a moment longer than I used to. I listen. I feel. I let the silence speak before I decide whether to answer it. Because I learned on the loneliest road in America that survival isn't about being fearless. It's about knowing when not to open the door.